it goes without saying that I need to begin by thanking those people who made this possible, and in particular Martina Poletti from To China Hub, and Eleonora Francesca Russo and Francesco Pekis from Formiche, and Ma Cheng from Peking University. They really help us a great deal and had worked like non-stop in all these days to make this possible. Then, of course, the organizer, China Med, that I represent here in my capacity as co-founder and project advisor, the China Med project, and the media platform Formiche, and in particular Paolo Messa, the editor. And then the partner, we start with Peking University, represented by the Center for Mediterranean Area Studies, and that I have the honor to direct, and the Institute for Global Cooperation and Understanding of Professor Wang Dong, the To China Hub of the University of Turin, of Professor Giovanni Dornino, who will join the panel tomorrow, Georgetown Representative Office in Rome, of Dr. Deborah Tonelli, and Tel Aviv University, represented by the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, and his Director of Research, Dr. Brandon Friedman, the Department of East Asian Studies of Tel Aviv University, represented by its chair, Professor Ori Sela. So the logic of this conference is actually quite simple, and it's a further step in our attempt to provide sound knowledge and potential impact on the potential impact of regional and global dynamics of the growing interconnection between the Euro-Mediterranean region and China. So we will do that through the support of a quite well-assorted group of renowned experts and practitioners. And I'm particularly honored today to open the conference by welcoming Ambassador Ferrari, President Prodi, that is about to join us, Professor Rabinovich, Director Pavel, and Professor Qingguo, and of course, Honorable Dere, the prestigious chair of this panel, whom I'm pleased to leave the floor. And by so doing, I would like to thank you all and wish you a productive and successful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enrico Fardella. I am very honored to participate in this panel, first of all, because I think I will learn a lot from listening to the panelists, and second of all, because of course, to participate in a panel like this means to be aware of the importance of the relations between China, of course, and the Mediterranean region. I think that this is one of the most important issues of the future, and I'm sure that the kind of attitude and approach that Formiche has wanted to give to this panel is the correct one, looking at the future, trends and challenges. I am always projected towards the future, and I sincerely think that the more we look at the future, the more we can definitely be aware of the fact that we can develop strategies together, we can overcome the challenges and actually transform challenges into opportunities. Because the more we know each other, the more we talk to each other, the better it is to develop strategies, to develop especially mutual knowledge, and especially in a way create a positive climate for political relationships, and also, of course, very pragmatic strategies and tactics that can help us really create an opportunity, a bridge to develop new ways of relating to each other in all domains, from commercial to cultural, of course, to other elements such as political, and of course, I would say social, which is also a very important element. I don't want to say more because I want our panelists to speak, and I will wrap up at the end. But I think that we have a wonderful panel, starting with Luca Ferrari, who is the Italian ambassador in China, and I think that of course his experience is particularly important for us because our relations, the bilateral relations, are very significant, have grown over the years, and I think that China is a strategic partner for Italy that of course reflects its importance also in the Mediterranean region, and therefore his views and his perspectives before of course course, listening to all the others, I think are very important in terms of opening remarks and introductory notes. So thank you very much, Luca Ferrari, for joining this panel. And of course, the floor is yours.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Professor Fardella, Formiche, and Tochina for inviting me. I'm very glad to just give these few opening remarks. I believe that it would be hard to observe the relations between the Euro-Mediterranean region and China without taking into consideration the predominant role that the United States plays both in the greater Middle East, that wide area that grosso modo spans from Mauritania to Pakistan, and the Far East, or the Indo-Pacific, as many prefer nowadays. But it would be even harder to deny that China, US, and Europe cooperation has become more intricate over the past 2 years. This has not happened overnight. The complex nature of the EU-China relation was acknowledged in March 2019, when the EU Commission and the High Representative for Foreign Affairs issued a joint communication titled EU-China, a Strategic Outlook. According to this document, that we all know now, Europe and China can be at the same time partners in areas of common interest, competitors on certain economic issues, and rivals regarding governance systems and values. Rivals does not at all mean enemies. It simply means what it means, that Europe and China support and promote different governance models. The Biden administration has suggested a similar approach. Secretary Blinken recently defined US relations with China as competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. Definitely, we are in presence of the victory of the English language. Nonetheless, most Western observers would agree that China can be at the same time a partner, a competitor, and in some cases a rival. Of course, there are divergences about the proportions we should give to the three components. So far, Europe, and the Euro-Mediterranean area with it, has typically seen China as a partner, and I believe that most countries of the region are more than willing to engage and cooperate. At the same time, divergences on systemic issues have recently become more visible, and I do not think that they will go away any soon. Nevertheless, from this observatory, I'm convinced that we can do a lot to make sure that partnership continues to prevail over rivalry, first and foremost on global issues. The participation of President Xi Jinping in the Washington Climate Summit and the Rome Global Health Summit at the invitation of Prime Minister Draghi have confirmed the mutual priorities, such as climate change and the war on COVID, can represent a common ground for fruitful engagement and cooperation among Europe, US, and China, notwithstanding frictions on other topics. The return of Washington to multilateral tables will offer important opportunities to resume work together. Climate, global health, and economic and trade policy could be the fields of reciprocal discussions. While global topics are bridging the gap, let us not forget regional crisis. The EU, China, and the US share in truth many goals and interests in specific contexts: the Palestinian question, the nuclear deal with Iran, and the Afghanistan peace process, as well as Myanmar and the Korean Peninsula. These are all good examples of issues where the three actors in question seek stability and security. In the Near and Middle East, as well as in Africa and Southeast Asia, Europe and the US are willing, I believe, to engage with China. In addition, of course, trade and economic exchanges will continue to represent a major convergence of interests. Notwithstanding the pandemic crisis, trade between most Western countries and China has been increasing, not decreasing. China is the world's second largest economy, enjoying a promising recovery. If, as declared by President Xi at Davos, and then more recently at the Boao Forum, China will move decisively and swiftly towards an open society, there will be growing opportunities for mutually beneficial economic exchanges. The G20, currently under the Italian presidency, represents more than many other fora the relevant common platform and laboratory to foster cooperation between Europe, the USA, and China, between the Euro-Mediterranean region and China. But let me just finish quickly. One must not forget that in the next decade, China will represent by itself 1/3 of global growth. Another third will come from the OCDE area, a final third from the rest of the world, including Brazil and India. It is impossible to ignore or decouple from China, or from Asia for that matter. In the short term, time has come to work with China to jumpstart globalization, to implement a rules-based multilateral system, to review the rules that govern the WTO and world trade. In the longer term, the idea that we can slow down China's growth is not a good one. It is actually a dangerous one. On the contrary, the Euro-Mediterranean region in particular must find its own way back to growth. Allow me a last quotation. As the Red Queen clearly put it to Alice in Lewis Carroll's novel, we must run as fast as we can to just stay in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ferrari. I like your speech because you enhanced some of the most important aspects also for the European Union at the moment. For instance, the concept of partnership, which is the most important political advancement, I think, in terms of how we look at the world and especially at countries like China, which is a competitor definitely, but we shouldn't think that rivalry is the real solution. Probably, as you also mentioned, cooperation and engagement, of course, are the key to the new relationship that we have to establish between our worlds from now on. I don't see President Prodi. Is he here or not? It seems that he's not here with us yet. So I would like to proceed with Professor Itamar Rabinovich, President of the Israeli Institute, former ambassador of Israel to the United States, former president of Tel Aviv University. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to speak about 5 most important global issues of the day as a context for the discussion of the specific topic of this conference. I will address 5 issues that are all interrelated. I'll begin with the need for a new international order or architecture. Nowadays, there isn't one. Ambassador Ferrari spoke about the complex relationship between the United States and China, and there is Russia, another actor, and these rivalries and partial cooperation do not constitute a functioning, coordinated international system that can cope with the underlying issues. Let me bring 2 examples from the Middle East region. One is Iran. There clearly is a need to deal with the Iranian nuclear. Let me just cite one major reason. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, so will Saudi Arabia and Egypt and maybe Turkey. And if these countries go nuclear, then the whole regime of nuclear control will be totally undermined. It needs to be done, and the solution to the Iranian quest for nuclear weapon is political diplomatic. It must not be military. For this to happen, China and Russia need to collaborate with the Western partners to the JCPOA. They did collaborate in coming to agreement on the first term, but of course, the United States had to reduce its size, and the result was that it was not very popular in the United States. President Trump came out of the agreement. President Biden wants to go back, but without effective Chinese and Russian cooperation, the issue could not be addressed and resolved in a political diplomatic way. Another example is the Syrian crisis. It today seems to be off the center stage. It is not. Since we are speaking in the Italian context, you know very well what another wave of Syrian refugees through Turkey, Greece, Italy, and the rest of Europe could mean for European stability. We remember what happened in 2015, 2016, and Italy definitely is at the receiving end. All efforts of the international system to resolve the Syrian crisis were foiled by the fact that Russia is heavily invested in protecting the regime in Syria, and China was averse to international intervention. The result was that the crisis was left to brew, and it seems far away from any resolution. So I could go on and on this issue, but I think the point has been made. Second point is the crisis of democracy and the liberal order. It's evident in countries that have new and fragile democracies, and say in Central and Eastern Europe, but it's also visible in many countries with a longer democratic tradition, beginning with the United States itself, moving on to Britain, and even in countries of Western Europe. If we look towards the elections that are just over the corner in France, and issues in Germany and other countries. In my own country, Israel is facing a crisis of democracy, and there is a major challenge to the larger liberal order that had been predominant since the end of World War II. It's both a political and ideological effort that needs to be made in order to reinvigorate, strengthen, and put both the democratic governance and the liberal order back in place. Thirdly, the issues of environment, energy, and climate, they are all interrelated. There is no denying the impact of climate change on different parts of the world. Negative in most cases. Just the other day, we saw the news about Russian deployment in the Arctic parts of Russia, given the fact that ice melted in the ocean, and Russia feels vulnerable. Tropical storms hitting the United States, and so forth and so forth. And clearly, one needs to deal with the larger strategy of protecting the environment, and of course finding alternative sources of energy. This has to be an international effort, and it's obviously a very important issue on our agenda. Fourth is immigration. And if we look at the globe, then almost every flourishing, thriving part of the world is the destination of potential and actual immigrants from poorer parts of the world. Europe has to face waves of immigration from the Middle East and from tropical Africa, the United States from Latin America, Australia from neighboring regions, and so forth and so forth. And it's just going to become a much more acute issue, because the numbers are growing. The pressure will grow. Traditional policies do not hold. More coercive policies are not popular, and of course collide with our system of values. But it is the fourth major issue. And the fifth and last issue I'd like to put on the table is inequality. Inequality both between the parts of the world and countries, and inequality within countries. And we can identify the root of the problem around 1980, when polarization and divergence began to occur in a big way. And we are familiar with all the indices of inequality in the United States, in Western Europe, in my own country, and of course between these, the OECD countries and other countries. It has to do with immigration that I mentioned before. It has to do with many other issues. There cannot be stability inside countries and stability in the relationship between countries before these issues of inequality are dealt with. And of course, the pandemic has just highlighted some of these issues. So to put these issues together, and we can see the interrelationships between and among all of them, this puts an awesome agenda for anyone interested in stability and prosperity in the global arena. Thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you very much for this rich intervention. Definitely, I appreciate it, particularly when you were talking about the refugees in Syria, which I know very well because I worked in the refugee camps in Iraq, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and I think this is probably one of the elements that could make us all reflect on inequality and global order, because the political use of refugees and in general migration certainly could be, let's say, the beginning of a huge reflection to, of course, improve the conditions of people all over the world. However, I am really honored to give the floor now to President Romano Prodi, whom I see at the center of my screen, former President of the European Commission, and also, as you all know, former Italian Prime Minister. Please, Romano Prodi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I enjoyed it. Sorry I was a little late to join you, but so is life. My task is to give a framework or 5-10 minutes, as I've been asked, on the political picture of the Mediterranean. Of course, with the final hint to the Chinese interest of the Chinese relation, but mainly what is happening in Mediterranean and what will be in the future. First of all, my starting point is that we must take a great consideration the American policy. Till 15 years ago, the engagement in the Mediterranean was total. There was a full, let's say, I don't say domination, but for really a full deep interest, American interest in the Mediterranean. And step by step, we assisted to a real disengagement, not a new doctrine, but a real disengagement. And the American policy in the Mediterranean is only because of Israel, and is only related to Israel. And we have been left with an empty space, in theory, with a great room to Europe and question mark to new local powers. And it was unexpected, by step, the empty space has been filled by Turkey, first of all, and Russia, and only marginally by European Union. And this is, I repeat, what was unexpected. From the global point of view, domination. The most important role is Turkey. Turkey has a global project for the Mediterranean. Cyprus, Syria, Libya, but not only that, the Balkans. Till the green belt of Balkans, as it's called commonly, but to Bulgaria, with a really increasing influence in that area. This is the first great change in terms of power. Russia we shall deal later, but we could also deal Russia. Russia has deeper interest than before, but not so total like Turkey. In the last period of time, we had interest mainly focused on Syria and Libya, in the last period of time. But this is the first change. The second is a hidden war, migration. In Spain, driven by Morocco, in Italy, driven by Libya and Tunisia, and Greek and Balkans in the German direction, you know. I call it a hybrid war. Is absolutely not appropriate definition, but gives you the idea of what. And the idea of how all the local powers are pushing against the European countries, you know. They use immigration as a, let's say, a military instrument. And we go to Europe, the division of Europe is weakening the European action military, in spite of the fact that Europe GDP is 10 times bigger or more than Russia or Turkey. Is an incredible situation, absolutely incredible. But this is the real situation. We could also have, of course, a very easy military influence, or at least training local forces. That now even training, for example, in Libya, is done by Turkey. And so is not only Europe absent with weapons, but absent with any, let's say, non-economic influence. And then we have very recent events. Let's say the Abraham agreements are dissolving in some way. The Abraham agreements were very wide. At least Saudi Arabia is now really embarrassed, and so now the situation, even for Israel, is different than a few months ago, and Turkey is clearly a problem, even if there are ups and downs. Russia, of course, but Iran, but even Qatar, you know. So we went back to a situation of instability, and Israel, that with the Abraham agreement, has widened the agreement with the neighbor areas, now is a bit destabilized inside, and is like before really enemy of all neighbor country, to stabilize itself. You should need to settle the problems with 2 billion Palestinians, and I don't see how this could be done, and the situation is complicated. Even if I don't think that Netanyahu is defeated, Netanyahu is still strong inside Israel, also because his opponents were unable to sign a coalition against him. I end with a political question mark. If the America will come back to have role, not only a role limited to Israel. The aid to Palestinians is just a signal of this new orientation, but this is China. China has an enormous economic influence in the Mediterranean, but less political influence than economic, and also from economic point of view, really a lot of activity in the Balkans, everywhere. If you think Libya, there were 36,000 Chinese technicians and workers in Libya who were in 4 days transferred back to China and never came back, you know. So in this situation, the Chinese policy in the South Mediterranean is, let's say, in a waiting mode, let us put it this way. A lot of activity is in the Balkans, and in the Balkans where also Turkey is working, in the Balkans, and mainly with the initiative, not only Silk Road, but what is called 17+1. 17+1, in my opinion, is debatable because China is perfectly right to do business choosing countries, but to make an institution that every year meets as an institution, that is not, of course, is uneasy for the most important European countries. I don't think it has been, a positive step. I do hope that we must, in some way, change the situation. It was easier a few months ago with the signature of the investment treaty of the program of CAI, but now everything is frozen. You know, honestly, I don't understand the increasing of the level of the sanctions. You know, when you put sanction to members of the parliament, you oblige the parliament to stop all the agreements with China. So I do think that, I repeat, it was not my task. My task was to give a picture, and my minutes are over. My task was to give a picture, but it is clear that we must change some attitude on both sides if we want to reopen the relation, because in this moment it's formally impossible to do anything, you know, 17+1, then sanction for the problem of Uyghurs, and I didn't talk about that, and the tension that is bringing with Turkey, and particularly, but this is always with us. Then the strong sanction, even I repeat, against members of European Parliament, and then everything is frozen. I think that I do hope that we understand that on both sides, something must be defrozen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Prodi. The picture you have drawn in front of our eyes is a picture of with strong colors, definitely. And I think that there is a lot that can be discussed, especially in the speeches of the following panelists. I think that your idea of this waiting mood for China, and also of course, enhancing the fact that whatever decision a country takes has a huge impact on the different regions of the world is very important, and of course requires some sort of reaction and preparation for the future, because preparedness is another one of those very important keywords we have to keep in mind in all the policies we define from now on. So thank you very much, President Prodi. I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Barry Pavel, Senior Vice President and Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And it's really, to say it's an honor is an understatement to be on a panel with such distinguished officials and leading experts. I think I'll be very direct and clear, just in the interest of provoking a very productive and rich conversation. I was asked to outline my thoughts on what are the broad global trends and challenges that might also affect the Euro-Mediterranean region, in addition to the broader world. And I do believe that we're in a new era of history, and I'm curious as to what future historians will look back and label this era. So I'll talk initially about 5 parameters of the big trends that I see, and then come back to some what I think are the core issues for the Euro-Mediterranean region. First, what we've come to know as great power competition. This is really the return of history and geopolitics as major nation states seek to navigate the new conditions that we're in. I think Robert Kagan put it very well. He said the jungle is growing back. And to me, this is one of the key driving and defining characteristics that will really affect all of what we're talking about. But second, we're still in the digital age, and in the way I think about it is we're still at the very beginning of the digital age. We have these vast suites of new technologies and their applications continuing to spiral out almost on a weekly basis. We're so lucky that we had a manifestation of that with the mRNA vaccine technology, for example, but a lot more. And so the decade of the 2030s, to me, from the people that the specialists that I speak to, it'll be quite startling to all of us in the scope of the technology-driven opportunities and challenges, in particular as the biotech age begins to dawn. Third, we're in a new information environment. Previous eras featured much less data that generally was of higher integrity. And we're now at the opposite end of the spectrum. We are awash in volumes of data that humans have never encountered before. And that data is often of highly uncertain quality and trustworthiness. And so we really need new forms of communication and authentication of all types of data. And the way I see it, these 3 factors, they play on each other. Great powers are using technologies, in some cases, using them for disinformation purposes. And so I see a big 4th trend as domestic challenges within Western democracies. This is a result of the previous 3 trends. In particular, I see great power autocracies leveraging digital technologies to confuse, spread disinformation, and sow dissent within and among Western democracies. The democratic polities were founded on the principles of civil discourse, as most of you know, in Italy, and the discourse is engaged in by known and trusted participants. So this is really a different challenge for democracies to overcome. I am very optimistic. We democracies always take a while to get to the right place, but we always do seem to get there. So I do think this is a noteworthy trend though. And of course, 5th, you can't talk about the future of global challenges and trends without also talking about the existential threat to our species, to our planet, climate change, one that we hope will feature rapid and meaningful cooperation among all countries, including China. And since China is the focus here, it's important to note that as a recent Scientific American research article stated, China's greenhouse gas emissions exceed those of all other developed nations combined. And while other countries, including the United States, contributed to the buildup over the many decades, right now that's the fact. And so China, I think, could play a particularly important role in mitigating global climate change by reducing resources for other purposes and focusing as much as possible on reducing their own emissions and working with others on climate goals. So those are the 5 major trends. And then in terms of how I see all of this playing out, I see the United States, and I really associate myself with Ambassador Ferrari's remarks and Professor Rabinovich, President Prodi. These were, I really think a lot of what they said really is going to be the case. But I see the US and very close US allies like Italy and partners starting to really work together much more closely across core domains that define our societies, economies, and security. I think all of these countries have now woken up. They've woken up a bit later than they should have to the growing challenge posed by China. I think we're all aware of the opportunities. We had good discussion of the economic growth and influence of China, but we also should be very clear-eyed, really clear-eyed about the challenges that the current leadership in China, which is different from all of previous leaderships of the Chinese Communist Party, the challenge that they pose. And China is looking to dominate a lot of these domains, technologies, regional and global security. And perhaps most importantly, I think we need to think about the values that we in free societies hold dear. Freedom of speech, the rule of law, basic human rights. And so how do we protect these values in a situation where China's growing influence is challenging them in very, very significant ways? It's clear that this particular leader of China is much more aggressive than previous leaders and much more open about his plans to make China the dominant power and to spread Chinese Communist Party values wherever possible. Just a few quick examples of coercive tactics. The Chinese diplomats in their brazen statements to sovereign countries across the world, the Chinese military, which violated a commitment by the Chinese leader to President Obama, for example, not to militarize the disputed islands in the Western Pacific. They have gone ahead and done that. The Chinese military and its weekly coercive aircraft intrusions into Taiwanese airspace, at one point causing fatalities of Taiwanese pilots. Heavy and unfair subsidies of Chinese technology companies who seek to hold the keys to the economies of other nations in which they seek a dominant position. And then China's coercive economic measures against countries like Australia, South Korea, Sweden, and many more who take positions that China just doesn't like, not to mention the genocide in Xinjiang. And so to me, the most dangerous current trend today is the degree to which the Chinese Communist Party leadership greatly underestimates the Italian, American, and other allies' will and capabilities to stand up for our values, our sovereignty, and our legitimate interests. This danger also will apply increasingly to the Euro-Med area, which I see becoming yet another arena for these trends to play out. I have no doubt, for example, because I watch military developments very closely, that the People's Liberation Army will seek to greatly increase its military exercises and presence in the Euro-Med area during this decade. This new military footprint will belie the many suggestions that China only wants to do business. It'll make it quite clear that that is not really the end of the story. And so to me, the best strategy for the US, for Italy, and other allies to pursue is the one that was outlined very well by the Biden administration, by Ambassador Ferrari, to cooperate wherever we can, non-proliferation, climate change, to compete and push back forcefully where we have to, technology, economy, and wherever necessary, hopefully to be avoided, be actual adversaries. But we all strive to be strategic partners. So the implications for the Euro-Mediterranean area, I think it's really a tale of two potential scenarios. One, if China decides to change its assertive approaches and learn to coexist on an equal playing field with Italy and the US and other such countries, then this decade will be one of unprecedented opportunity and growth for the Euromed area. We're seeing that play out in areas like energy and other areas of activity. If that does not happen, then I really fear that crisis looms ahead for the region and the broader world. But I'd like to end on an optimistic note. I don't think that China will be able to continue its across-the-board activities of the kinds that I've mentioned, because it will clearly see the unity and strength of solidarity across the democratic world in defense of our shared values, which we hold so dear. And while it might take some time for us to get to that point, one can easily see that once that happens, there will be vast new opportunities for all countries in the Euromed region, leading to new levels of prosperity and the flourishing of society. I'm not saying that'll be the end of history. I'm just saying that we'll see an enormous new unleashing of the economic potential and transformation of the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pavel. Your very strong picture about this, especially the role of China in the world. Of course, we have a very prominent professor from China who is ready to answer your suggestions and solicitations, of course. And therefore, I want to invite Professor Jia Qingguo, member of the Standing Committee of the 13th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, member of the Standing Committee of the Central Committee of China Democratic League, and also former Dean of the School of International Studies at Peking University. Professor Qingguo, I hope I have pronounced it correctly. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. It's a great honor for my institute, the Institute of Global Understanding and Cooperation at Peking University, to be a partner of this project, this conference, together with Formici and ChinaNet project. I feel privileged to speak on this distinguished panel. The topic of this panel is looking at the future trends and challenges. Let me outline some of the broader trends in the world that I believe have been in process, and then some thoughts about what we should do in this world of great change and uncertainties. The first trend, I think, is the rise of nationalism. The rise of nationalism is more visible than everywhere than before. You can find it in the rise of the rightist forces in Europe, the Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, and its continued influence in American politics since he left office, Russian annexation of Crimea, and the increase of trade frictions between countries. It has also been seen in China, for example. Some Chinese netizens have been chanting for war to reclaim China's lost territories and to get the US military warships and military aircrafts out of China's adjacent areas. The rise of nationalism has a disruptive effect on the development of cross-border trade and investment, on management of territorial and maritime disputes, and also international cooperation to address various global challenges. It threatens to make the world a less prosperous and more secure, a less secure place to live. Remember the 2 world wars the world went through, in part because nationalism? The second trend is that what I call deglobalization. slowdown in the economic growth growth of trade and investment has become a reality. Actually, in part because of the global pandemic in recent years. Fearful of the implication of new technologies such as 5G and AI may have on national security, there is increasing call for decoupling or self-sufficiency to address the perceived threats. This is especially true in the US and in China. The Biden administration's efforts to press its allies to cut its ties with China in high-tech cooperation and certain links in the supply chain has also accelerated this trend. Deglobalization is also seen in some in other areas, such as increasing obstacles to people-to-people exchanges. There are increasing restrictions on exchanges in science and technology between especially China and the US, and international education, academic exchanges, media coverage in the name of national security. There are so many restrictions now to govern people-to-people exchanges. It's incredible. I think this trend of deglobalization bodes ill for the world. Among other things, it threatens to undermine economic prosperity and lower the threshold of military confrontation. The third trend is changing balance of power. In recent years, there is much talk about the so-called Dongsheng Xijiang in China, which means the rise of the East and the decline of the West. Although it has been exaggerated, it also reflects a broad trend of development in the world. Statistics show that the Group 7's Group 7's share of the world's GDP went down from 60% in 1992 to 47% in 2015. It further dropped to 30.15% in 2018, and it is projected to go down to 27.26% in 2023. According to the decline, although the decline in military capabilities is more moderate, the share of NATO's spending has also shrunk from 2/3 of the global defense spending to little more than half in 2017. The political infighting in Western countries, especially in the US, and their inability to address various kinds of domestic problems, ranging from fighting the COVID pandemic, economic growth, socioeconomic equality, drugs, street violence, infrastructure development, and ethnic conflicts. This has led to increasingly critical scrutiny of the once veered Western model of development. This development has created much anxiety both in the West and in the East. Both finds it very difficult to adjust. Whereas the West finds it difficult to adapt to the rise of the East finds it difficult to appreciate the limits of its power. It also comes at a time when the world most needs the leadership of the West. Instead, however, what the world finds is the Trumpian approach characterized by blaming other countries for their own domestic problems, and even efforts to undermine the existing international mechanisms of global governance, such as WTO and WHO. The fourth trend is the revival of Cold War-like ideological competition. It is with much irony that it is the US under the Trump administration that launched the ideological warfare against China. It is also ironic that the Biden administration appears to have inherited this Trumpian legacy. The US ideological warfare against China reflects more its imagined implications of China's success in domestic governance and international influence, its leadership and security, than what China has actually said and done in the real world. Has China advocated an alternative model of development to the rest of the world? No. Has China tried to impose its political system on others as the US has done? No. Has China tried to change the international laws and norms to reflect China's own political priorities and values? No. The fact is, first, despite reform and openness of policy of China in the past 4 decades, China has never changed its political system and official ideology. How come suddenly we have an ideological competition? Second, despite its rise, China has never developed an alternative ideology to compete with that of the US. In fact, China has embraced many universal values such as market principles, rule of law, freedom and democracy and equality the Americans share. It has even enshrined some of these values into the officially declared 24-character core values in China. Third, China has never advocated an alternative ideology to rival with that of the US or the West, as it did in the pre-1970s. In the most it has done is that it claims that it has been successful in development, despite it has not followed the Western model. And that experience shows that any country can achieve what China has done as long as they develop their own path of development according to their own national conditions. So China's development experience is unique. It's not supposed to be replicated. Nevertheless, some in the West, Washington, believe that it has no alternative but to launch an ideological warfare against China. During the Trump administration, it did it alone. The Biden administration has been trying to do it together with its allies. Since the US wages such much influence in the world, if it says there is an ideological confrontation or competition, many believe it exists. The danger of ideological competition is that it introduces identity politics into interstate relations and make rational management of such relationship very difficult. It provides ideological fantasies to poison the relationship to the point of no pragmatic accommodation, sometimes necessary if we wish to live in peace together. Finally, one finds the trend of the rise and decline of two overlapping interpretations of international order. Now, most countries subscribe to the post-war world order established by original members of the nation states under the leadership of the US. However, since then, countries have interpreted this world order in different ways. Broadly speaking, there are two main interpretations. The first interpretation is more based on Western liberal values. It emphasizes on protection of individual civil and political rights. At the end of the Cold War, it led to such claims as human rights trumps the sovereignty rights, as during the war against on Kosovo. Most developed countries have subscribed to the interpretation. The second interpretation is more based on sovereignty principles, stressing respects on national sovereignty and territorial integrity and non-intervention in other countries' internal affairs. Most developing countries subscribe to this interpretation. Now, when the West was strong, the first interpretation has a better chance to set the international agenda. Now, this situation is changing. If the current change in the balance of power continues to shift, then the second interpretation will gain influence. What does all this mean for us? First, I think we should acknowledge the fact that we're living in an age of fundamental changes. The international community is facing tremendous challenges, ranging from nationalism to lack of international cooperation to address various kinds of global challenges. What we need to do is to work together to deal with uncertainties and challenges instead of bickering with each other. Finally, secondly, we need to recognize that we need to fight against extreme nationalism, which can pit us against each other and leads the world into a dangerous direction. Third, we need to recognize the change in balance of power. It's time for the West to give more attention to the needs and desires of the non-Western countries. and work together to find a way to live together peacefully in search for peace and prosperity. The previous way of leadership, more by power, should be replaced by leadership more by persuasion. Fourth, we need to abandon an ideology as a tool to conduct diplomacy. In the long run, it's counterproductive and quite dangerous. The best way is to influence others by, not by imposition, but by influence by example. Finally, while one should not abandon its aspirations about what the world should be like, one should be realistic and pragmatic enough to make the best out of what it can be. It may be a good time for people to try to bridge the two interpretations of the world order and work together to make the world a better and safer one. Let me stop here. Sorry, I take more time.
Thank you for your very interesting comments and reflections. There is a lot of to reflect upon after your very important speeches, dear panelists. Before I wrap up, I would like to maybe ask you a question, and I would require you to answer in a couple of minutes, because I was thinking while we were talking that there are already many areas in which we all cooperate from the east to the west, in particular you had the US and China, for instance, like for instance the UN Security Council, where China and the US sit together since a long time, and it's a place which is fundamental for the destinies of the whole world, and it's a place in which, you know, they both sit on an equal level, of course, and have the same impact on the world, together with France, of course, which is the representative also of the European world, I would say, not just the European Union, and Russia. So I would like to ask you, President Prodi talked about empty spaces. And our last speaker, Professor Qingguo, mentioned the fact that we need a new balance of power. This has been mentioned by all of you. I would like to ask you, where would you find new spaces to develop a new narrative that could be more inclusive, would favor more mutual understanding, would create an environment in which we can actually build on what we have learned from the different experiences? And it seems that according to the different perspectives, all of us are very aware of the challenges, despite, of course, the different angles, but in general, there is this awareness. And therefore, I would really like you to answer in a couple of minutes with some keywords that could be an indication for us to create a new strategy in the future. I would start from President Prodi. President Prodi, would you like to answer my question, please?
Not easy, but I try. Now, the problem is clear. The difference is that in the Mediterranean, we have the rise of new regional powers. This is the real new event, you know. And then it becomes very abstract to talk as we should be in the previous situation, in which you could have Americans dictating the rules to the local power, especially after the end of the Soviet Union. This was like a clear message. The Mediterranean is also, because of NATO, is an American influence. Now, everything is changing. The question, the answer to your question is the American policy changing? I was insisting before that was limited to Israel. Now there is a new step to give money to Palestinians that was suspended. But clearly this is a totally new discussion about NATO to change mind and body. Maybe this clash between US and China will change also the relation inside the Mediterranean, to give a special role to NATO, with a special role to Europe. But this is only a guess, only a bet. Nobody knows what is happening now. What I think is that the empty space is not anymore empty. Nobody is satisfied how has been filled. There is deep thinking how to fill it. Then I end my answer, because my statement ended with an answer.
Thank you, President Prodi. Professor Rabinovich?
Yeah. I think, I'm not sure that there are empty spaces available, but I think the role of leadership could be decisive. Let me recall the accomplishments or the exploits of Henry Kissinger as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State in the 1970s. Remember that this one person, with the support of the president, opened up to China, did the détente with the Soviet Union, and started the Arab-Israeli peace process after the October 1973 war. So the challenge is there. Do we see an American leader who can rise to the occasion? Do we see a Chinese leader who can rise to this occasion? I have no expectations of Vladimir Putin and Russia, but I think the ball is in the court of either the United States of China for a leader, their leader, to come up with a policy that I think would mitigate conflict and enhance cooperation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pavel, please.
Well, I think as always, President Prodi and Professor Rabinovich hit on the really important issues. I love the term, the role of leadership is decisive. There have been historic periods in the past where great leaders have risen to help get out of major security crises. And so Henry Kissinger was mentioned, Brent Scowcroft, ending the Cold War, by helping President Bush to work with President Gorbachev and end the Cold War without a single shot being fired. I mean, that's the kind of leadership and diplomacy that is required right now. And so, people are more important than structures, but structures can also help. So the two structures that I would point to are the Atlantic Council recently recommended a transatlantic coordinating council between the United States and Europe. That's a good forum. So there's a strategic dialogue between the US and the EU that is meaningful. And then why don't we include China, in certain formats? The other structure that I've recommended, that I actually came up with a couple of years ago, was a NATO-China Council. There's no reason there shouldn't be a dialogue between NATO and China as the interests of both parties, increasingly are intersecting, including Chinese exercises in the European theater, but other purposes as well. So I think I like the point about leadership. Structures can also be helpful, and I think those are two examples that might help answer your very, very important question.
Thank you. Professor Gia, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. Personally, I also I believe that we need to somehow change our mindset. Also, what's China? China. How do you look at China? China is a stakeholder of the existing international order. It has vast interests and stakes, just like the US. So at that level, we are the same. Of course, we are different in ideology and in political system, in many other, in our view of different things. But fundamentally, we are stakeholder. We benefit from the existing international order. So, and for us as superpowers, China is a future superpower. You can only protect your interests by defending the international order. And to defend the international order is a very costly business. You need to leverage other countries' resources to help you to do that without making yourself bankrupt. So the best China and the US can do to each other is to leverage each other's resources to help maintain the international order rather than squandering our resources at each other in confrontation. So I think that mindset is very important. During the past 40 years, the US has leveraged China in the sense that, you know, we're not in confrontation or war or whatever, okay? And we have economic relationship, both benefited. And now it's a lie that the US has, you know, has not benefited from this experience. China has never, you know, there are people in China who say that the US has benefited more. I think it's impossible to calculate. Both have benefited tremendously. But as far as China has leveraged the US resources by taking a free ride, by being taking a free ride for a long time. Now China is becoming too big. It's impossible to take a free ride. So China has to take care of the international order as well. So in a way, the best thing the China and the US can do is to work with each other, to leverage each other's resources to help maintain this international order, both benefit rather than squandering their resources against each other. So if you have that kind of mindset, a lot of problems can be moderated or managed between the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jia. I will conclude now by wrapping up, as it is said usually. And I would like to comment on the fact that the terminology that has been used today in this particularly interesting panel, I would say, is, let's say, swinging between different attitudes. On one hand, a very, let's say, open and negotiating attitude, which has given very courteous suggestions, you know, between the panelists on what the new world order should be, and the fact that we are all aware of the most important issues that should be solved, from migration, of course, to economic issues, to environment. There is an agreement on that level. On the other hand, there has been a less cautious terminology used, in the sense that most of the times there is, let's say, less recognition of the other's ability to understand one's own perspective. This is a problem that I think is accompanying us since a long time, and I think it is about time we keep up with history and recognize that things are changing, as most of you have said. Of course, in this sense, and the fact that we all have to develop new postures regarding our position in the world, considering all the issues that have been mentioned, like the fact that, for instance, there are new powers emerging and imposing themselves in some cases, or in others, simply invading spaces that have been left empty, for instance, by the West or by the others, or by the US, as President Prodi was mentioning about the Mediterranean. Well, in this sense, we have to redefine the hierarchy of interests. This is particularly important for the US at the moment because we don't want, as Europeans especially, we don't want to be strangled between, of course, China and the US, because we have a moral authority. We are particularly relevant in many of the equilibria in the world, and therefore we want to be partners. And this is another important word that has emerged, especially at the beginning, the concept of partnership that should lead us, of course, to the idea that because the European Union is using partnership nowadays to talk about the countries that were once called the third countries or developing countries, we are calling them partners. I think that we should all develop a general partnership, and we should all negotiate on the values at the basis of this global partnership for the benefit of all. Of course, this requires a lot of trust. Trust, in my view, is the most important element in politics. And I think that this has been a transversal element, always collateral to what has been said. I don't go into details in all the different issues that have been mentioned by each panelist, but definitely there is a question of trust, because we know that when we talk about Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia once again, or Israel, the role of Israel in the global order and all the rest, of course we need a question of trust, especially because we want to fight for a better world. I like very much when inequality was mentioned, because inequality is a question that really is relevant to all of us. And we know very well, since the pandemic has taught us a good lesson, that inequality is not just a question of being good to each other or trying to make the lives of people better. Inequality can also be used as a sort of exchange card in politics when it comes to the idea that it is in the interest of all of us to fight inequality, because once the world will be equal, of course, because we are all interdependent and interconnected, all the world will be better. We will have less problems. Of course, migration, which I consider an important issue in the sense of development, because development has never been mentioned by any of you, but I suggest we add it to the panel as a concluding remarks. In terms of development, also migration could be, of course, reduced and also managed better, because we concentrate in particular on development and we reduce inequalities. So what we need is definitely abandon this waiting mood that somebody has mentioned. Waiting is not good, because history is running faster than us, definitely. We have certainly experienced this with the pandemic. Therefore, we cannot wait. We have to negotiate. We have to be aware of the fact, as you were mentioning, that the impact of the different choices and different strategies of the countries is immense, and therefore we have to somehow negotiate the position we all of us share to make sure that the result is the best for all of us. It's not easy, definitely. You were mentioning this, all of you, showing that there is a strong awareness of the fact that the redefinition of interest is really very complex, but it is possible, I think. Of course, I appreciate the frankness of all the panelists. I appreciate also the call to the West to redefine its position in the world. It is true that the world has changed. It is true that we cannot rely anymore on our reputation only. It is true that we have to demonstrate that the values in which we believe, that for us have been huge and fantastic achievements, especially social achievements, that we have built day by day over the centuries, are worth to be respected, especially in terms of human rights. I know that this is not anymore, let's say, accepted without any kind of critical attitude. I think we have to re-win the moral authority that especially the European Union has in this field, but we are ready to do so, I think. As well as of course, as soon as we understand that we have to do this. And therefore, I think that we can definitely conclude by saying that all that you said can be summarized and synthesized in the word nexus, creating nexus between different aspects of all the things we have talked about, and also system. Talking about a system which is, let's say, overcoming the typical international relation concept of world system, but thinking about an interaction, integration of policies, narrative that could be more inclusive, and mutual understanding that must be based on sharing the ideas. I think that this emerges from all that has been said in a critical way, but critiques in this way are very constructive, and I think that this panel, in this sense, really deserves to be watched for those who will watch it, and of course to be remembered. Probably I suggest also to be transformed into a publication, because I think that it's particularly relevant, the attitude that all the panelists had towards the matter, without any kind of filter, with great sincerity, and this helps to build the trust that we need from now on as a key word for all our relationships. Thank you.